Hey guys, I'm Uriza. This story is all about what if Naruto was assigned to Asuma and Team 10. Mizuki never got to shoot his mouth off at Naruto the night he took the Scroll of Seals. Other than skipping a half-manic monologue from him, what exactly did this change for everyone's favorite blonde ninja? Who knows? Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 72, There's No Place Like Home. Ino loved waking up next to Naruto. Despite being named after fire, most mornings in High no Kuni tended to start out particularly nippy before things got hotter, and there was nothing like a warm body radiating natural heat just inches away from you. It made her want to stay in bed instead of getting up to greet the cold morning air. Did they have to get up so early? Yes, they were shinobi, but the sun could come up a bit more and raise the temperature a bit before they had to start moving around and doing things, couldn't it? As per usual, Naruto was the first to officially stir, depriving Ino of her living furnace and giving her a quick rush of cold air as he threw the comforter up to get out from underneath it. The blonde girl was not a morning person, and let it be known with a tired whine. "I know," Naruto said in an understanding tone as he started shaking off the morning cobwebs. He was a slow starter as well, but once he was up and about it didn't take him long to get raring to go. Ino didn't share his unquenchable, quick-to-burn engine. "Do you have to go back to work today?" "No," Ino grumbled from underneath a pillow on her head before peeking out with a drowsy smirk. "I don't have to go back to work until you're cleared. I'm your babysitter. So as long as the Hokage is forcing you into time off, I have time off. Days off." The thought made Naruto want to scoff. His leave had to have been for more mental reasons than physical. A lot of things had happened, and his experiences had been intense with little to no time to process any of them. Ino was not only qualified as a medic nin, she could double as a therapist in this case if it was necessary, so it was a no-brainer that she would be slated to oversee him in the meantime. The fact that they were romantically involved was a bonus, as was the fact that most nights that week ended with them having sex. Ino had taken to calling it Naruto's physical therapy, especially in public, so that she could talk about it around people and see if he would get flustered. Just watching Ino sit up in bed and stretch out like a cat reminded Naruto of it, because she wasn't wearing a stitch of clothing. Picking on Naruto was a good way to start the day, Ino decided after watching Naruto shuffle out of the room hiding a clear case of morning wood that had likely been aggravated at the sight of her in absolutely nothing. It was just some good-natured teasing. There was nothing wrong with that. It was a foundation of their relationship. Chuckling quietly at the sound of the shower running, likely cold, Ino got out of bed and went to grab some clothes for the day. It was nice that Naruto had her clothes washed whenever she kept things over there. It gave her a selection of entire outfits to choose from. And he had given her basically half of his dresser to store clothes and unmentionables away in. She didn't even have to slip back home to have something clean and functional to change into. Everything she needed was already at Naruto's house. He still had her toiletries and other things that she'd kept over from when she'd house sat in his absence from Konoha, and even more. Ino looked around Naruto's apartment and realized something that made her want to ask Naruto something that was entirely out of the blue after he came back into the room after his shower. He regarded her with a quick smile as he re-entered the room and saw her sitting on the bed. He had missed the look of utter determination on her face as she amassed the guts to speak up and say what was on her mind. "Goldie, I want to move in," she told him, eliciting a look of sudden surprise from her boyfriend. I'm keeping more and more of my stuff over here, and you can count more nights in the week when I just stay here instead of going home." It wasn't only those things either. As a matter of fact, she hadn't even gone home in days. When she was hungry she would either go back to Naruto's apartment and cook for the both of them, or the two would go out on a date and eat then. When she was tired, the first thought in going home to rest would usually carry her up the stairs to the door of Naruto's place. More and more, home started to seem like the place where she could spend private time with her man, and that certainly wasn't her parents' house. Naruto had probably been there a handful of times since coming back to Konoha anyway. Instead of responding with unbridled, optimistic enthusiasm at finally getting the chance to live with someone instead of coming home to no one all of the time, Naruto seemed to be thunderstruck. I don't think you moving into here is such a good idea, Ino-chan. Naruto being anything but excited about her idea hadn't been something that Ino had been expecting. What? Why? You don't want to move in together? She asked, visibly trying to recover from getting cold water dumped all over her aspirations of moving forward in their relationship. She did an admirable job of trying to downplay her feelings on the matter, but they still clearly showed. I guess it is kind of quick. I mean, we only just started sleeping together not that long ago. Naruto looked at her in confusion before realizing that his quick dismissal of her request could have been construed badly. No, I don't mean that. I mean I'm moving out soon, so why would you move now when you'd just have to do it again right after? Any hurt feelings Ino might have been nursing cleared up after learning of Naruto's pending plans. You are. Yeah. I told you about that, Naruto said with a shrug as he threw on a mesh armor shirt. Remember when I was talking about building a place on the property that my clan's mask temple is on? I know I told you about that. I told a bunch of people. More like he told anyone who would listen. It was something he was proud of, that he actually had property that belonged to his family. Because he had a family. A legitimate clan with land holdings and everything. Why wouldn't he run around telling everyone about that? Until he'd found out that he'd actually had a pedigree as a ninja, it had only been something he'd dreamed about in the past. Recollection of what Naruto was talking about shined in Ino's eyes. She remembered that place. It had been the first place Naruto had kissed her. Oh yeah, she said dreamily before the scope of what Naruto hadn't quite said sank in. Wait, you're saying you did that? If self-satisfaction had a face, it likely would have been eerily similar to what Naruto's looked like at that moment. I'm doing that. I'm doing the hell out of that. Got the foundation and the frame up before the last mission and everything. He needed someone to be impressed with him for his efforts, and who better than the girl he shared a bed with on most nights. Ino hadn't really thought of Naruto as the do-it-yourself type, so it was a noteworthy accomplishment. I thought your clones were terrible for manual labor though, she said, engrossed with the idea of Naruto being an eventual homeowner. Naruto let out a snort, thinking of his clones that could fight a full-scale battle and effectively put their existences on the line without a second thought, but found the task of putting hammer to nail too much to stomach. They are, he told his thoroughly intrigued girlfriend. I had to make a deal with myself that I'd hire some genin teams to do all the rest of the grunt work. You know, putting in the insulation, putting in my hardwood floors. D-rank shit, he'd have to hire a proper electrician to deal with getting his to-be home lit up properly. I've got the money to burn. Ino shifted down onto her belly, grinning at Naruto as she thought of the annoyance he'd likely be putting some poor hapless rookie shinobi through. Fresh out of the academy, and one of their first all-important missions would be building his house, MMM. You know, I used to hate that system when we were the manpower for it. Now, it's kind of nice to know we've got genin on tap to do our odd jobs. If anything, Naruto shared in Ino's delight at the thought of properly inducting Konoha's youngest members of its ninja force into the lifestyle, right? It's like hazing. It sucks when it's happening to you, but doing it to other genin later is great. The circle is complete, I say. Elsewhere in Konoha, Hokage's office. Debriefings were the worst. Jiraiya hated them, but was more than experienced enough to know why they were necessary. They were a military force, and any little thing they saw out in the field could have massive repercussions. Little to nothing could be glossed over in that regard. More so when the missions you went on were vital to village security from the outset. Still, bringing up anything that had to do with the mission he had just gone on made him angry in hindsight. He'd been able to keep a level head, because more lives than just his had been on the line, but afterwards it almost made him wish he wasn't a man of his word. If he had been more vindictive, he would have turned most of the denizens of Iwagakure into mountain toad droppings. That course of action was several bridges too far, however. And it made him angry that he wasn't that much of a bastard to do it in the end. After retelling everything from his perspective that had taken place from the time he'd set out with his team, Jiraiya stood in front of the Hokage, his foot tapping on the floor to show how stir-crazy he was. Hiruzen remained silent for a moment, digesting everything that he had been told, eventually choosing to speak his mind on the matter. In his overconfidence, Oniki likely, pardon my language, screwed himself to the wall in his endeavor, Hiruzen said, eliciting an amused snort out of Jiraiya. Good. Anything to calm the man down right now. An irate Jiraiya would do no one any good. He has the Shodai Hokage's necklace, does he not? The reminder of the piece of jewelry that remained around Onaki's throat raised a bit of anger in Jiraiya's chest. Looting the body of his godson that he hadn't even killed yet. Only a level head kept him from leaving his post to try and take a hunk out of the Chuchikage after his clone dispelled and showed him that information. Right around his stubby neck, front and center like a war trophy, Jiraiya told his old sensei. There was no way he'd have missed that hunk of rock. He wanted to rip it off of the man. It didn't belong to Onaki. Tsunade had entrusted it to Naruto. But getting out while he and the others he'd brought with him were ahead was the best idea at the time. Instead of being angry, Hiruzen seemed to be coldly analytical. Then he has no high ground to stand on in this situation, he said, lacing his fingers together in front of him. Naruto and Sasuke being missing in action was put into our records long before the incident that our enemies would try to spin as us conducting raids on Iwagakure. No one will side with him, knowing what they do about the situation. Iwagakure tried to steal not only Konoha's Jinchuriki, but one of the most coveted Kekai Genkai in the world, and a national treasure. No village would ever work with a leader that would do such a thing, all at once and under the radar to boot. He still has the necklace, Jiraiya asserted in return. It's a piece of jewelry in the grand scheme of things. That's all, Hiruzen rationalized. Other than being worth money, it helped Naruto keep the Kyuubi's nasty voice out of his head. With Iwagakure's complete lack of tailed beasts, it failed to serve a purpose of control for them. Besides, I don't think he'll try to find a buyer for it. For Onaki, it's a vanity prize, if anything. He'll keep it just to think that he came out on top in this encounter. We all know for a fact that he did not. Between Naruto and Sasuke cutting a bloody swatch through a fair number of his Chunin and even a few Jonin, Jiraiya basically rendering their current emergency evacuation measures worthless, and the Hornet's Nest Iwagakure's actions could potentially stir up internationally, as all of this had transpired during the Chunin exams, at a time when many villages' vulnerable genin could have been caught in the crossfire. There was nothing they could say. Thinking of the setting in which all of this occurred brought another thing to mind. We're not sending our genin back there for the final exam, are we? Jiraiya asked, wincing at the thought. Shoddy officiating would likely be the least of their worries if they were to do so. It wasn't even an option as far as the Hokage was concerned, no. And unfortunately, we won't be able to simply ask for reports on the progress of the candidates that have reached the finals. A plume of smoke blew from Hiruzen's mouth and nose, reflecting his disappointment on the matter. It doesn't seem as though we'll be able to promote any this time around. Still, it was better than putting the lot of them and their teachers at risk just for the opportunity to raise the ranks of one or two of them to the next level. Considering all of this, Hiruzen let out a tired sigh. We are coming into our fair share of problems lately, aren't we? There was always something prevalent that needed solving. It came part and parcel with leadership. Still, these things seemed to be compounding and overlapping. Trouble always did seem to find ways to pile up. Several of these issues directly involved Jiraiya, or people that Jiraiya was directly connected to. That did not make for a happy Toad Sage. Oh, where should we start, exactly? Jiraiya asked acerbically. The fact that Akatsuki's still running around as free as jaybirds? That Naruto and Sasuke almost got their good bits scooped out by old man Onaki, just because? Or should we go ahead and jump right into the fact that apparently Orochimaru doesn't care about keeping all of his twisted shit under wraps anymore? Which led to the piece of news that had almost been swept away with everything else that had been happening in the now. The Fire Daimyo's guardian ninja came to Konoha to inform the Hokage that Orochimaru was leaving little leftover remnants of his experiments all over the Hai no Kuni countryside. It was so unlike him to be that way. Formerly, it had been so difficult to get even the slightest hint of where Orochimaru was, or what he was doing. Now, it was almost as if he were daring someone to make a move on him. To roll the dice and take a shot at putting him down for good. He was simply too confident that there was no one capable of it. Probably with good reason the way things were. It made Jiraiya's blood boil. I'm going to kill him, sensei, Jiraiya said with a stark coldness that contrasted his normal boisterous demeanor. I'm going to kill him the way I should have years ago. I don't know how, I don't know where, but I'll find a way. Jiraiya, calm down. Everything that had been happening was circulating close to Jiraiya's personal life. bringing up past mistakes, threatening an important part of what he saw as the future. As shinobi, they had a bad habit of letting things from the past bleed over into what they were trying to build for those meant to come after. Getting angry about him now won't do anything to change the fact that he's out there somewhere, doing God knows what. We need a more recent idea of where he is now if we want to do anything. All we can do is wait. Jiraiya was tired of waiting, of scouting. It was all he had been doing for years. He had missed most of his godson's life doing it, and this was what it had gotten them. For all that his information network had brought Konoha throughout the years, they weren't much better off than they would have been without him ever starting it. They were still suffering. Still taking blows from the original person he had sought out in the first place. The entire reason that Jiraiya had started a spy network was still out there, and every minute he walked the planet his plans were in play. And they would make someone somewhere suffer greatly. Orochimaru came from here. Anyone he hurts, any military power he screws over to give us that clue, they see us as responsible for letting that monster loose on the world. Jiraiya said, back when he was careful about letting nothing slip on what he was doing, or where he had been so that we couldn't hunt him, at least people tried to pretend that it wasn't him doing the awful things we all know he did. People treated him like an urban legend almost. Now he doesn't care anymore. Jiraiya, Hiruzen said, stopping the man in the midst of his attempted tirade, No. At that, Jiraiya slunk down into the nearest chair and ran a hand through his long, spiky white mane. The proactive approach that they had been trying only seemed to leave them more at a loss for every supposed victory they were getting. But waiting for something to react to would likely damn someone else. The resources it would take to wage a shadow war against Orochimaru would leave us vulnerable to the rest of our enemies. We need more allies. With the loss of Tsunagakure as a comrade village, that only left a relationship with Kiri that was still in its infancy. There were cracks between the Great Walls that represented the 5 most powerful hidden villages that allowed for groups like Akatsuki and Orochimaru's organization to operate inside of. They were like vines that grew within the mortar, and if they weren't dealt with they would eventually bring it all down. Naruto's mindscape. Due to the current circumstances, Naruto was very much unable to go out and search for things to do to satisfy his short attention span. The only thing he could really do was sit around and take inventory. That meant tending to his tools and restocking his supplies of explosive notes and seal-based tags by hand. It was all a way to keep from staying idle. Naruto hated remaining still. He hated silence. Even if that silence meant that he wasn't hearing from one particular figure in his life that he hadn't heard go truly silent for quite some time. One that most others would have been more than ecstatic to hear nothing from. He hadn't been in contact with the 9 tails inside of him since he'd gone dark at Soraku. Now that he had a moment, it was time to reach out and make sure everything was copacetic. As he made his way inside of the mental representation of the seal that held back the powerful creature inside of him, Naruto stared down the being within. Gigantic, angry red eyes opened up, and the furred muzzle snarled at the sight of him. Some things just never changed. At a loss for how to cordially start a conversation with someone/thing that completely abhorred him, Naruto went for the stock standard greeting he had on hand, "S up." "And what exactly are you doing here, boy?" the Kyuubi asked, contemptuous to Naruto's very presence. "Have you had enough of nearly getting us killed yet? Or are you here to test just how much control over my chakra you think you still have?" It finished with a bout of deep, mocking chuckles. "I don't get it," Naruto replied. "It should still be about 4 tails before I start to slip." That was what it had been during his fight with Kisame. It had been a struggle to maintain enough composure to fight a thoughtful battle, but he had still managed while he had been in that form. Nothing had happened that Naruto could recall to change that to any significant, lasting degree. Any seals affecting his chakra that he might have missed during his escape from imprisonment had been taken care of by Jiraiya during the journey back to Konoha. "You're missing a little something that's normally sitting front and center around your neck." The resulting blank look from Naruto elicited a nasty sharp-toothed grin from the hateful fox. "Oh my god. They never told you. Tsunade's necklace? What about it?" "Yes, that was missing, along with everything else he had taken on his last mission." Jiraiya told him that Uchiha had the keepsake, and it pissed him off to no end that the gnome of Iwagakure had possession of a valuable gift from an important person to him, but Naruto didn't know how that factored into tailed beast control. It's gone now. So what? That accursed Senju necklace you wore kept my influence in check by a measure, though I question whether or not the woman who gave it to you knew it at the time. I'm certain the Toad Man did, however, the Kyuubi said, its hot breath blasting out at Naruto scornfully. You no longer have it. Without it, you'll never go any further. Not if I don't allow it. Just another reason for you to hate me, isn't it? It finished, opening its large mouth with bellowing laughter at the plight of its Jinchuriki. While Naruto wasn't keen on the reminder that his necklace had been taken away when he'd been taken prisoner, it wasn't enough to elicit an explosive response out of him. I don't hate you, you asshole fox, he said, causing the Kyuubi to stop laughing out of sheer surprise. Its mirth was quickly replaced with outrage at Naruto's attempts to blunt its pointed words. Don't lie. It makes you seem more pathetic. Naruto shook his head as if to say no. I'm a shitty liar. With a shrug of his shoulders, he continued on with his point. Yeah, I don't know my mom and dad because of what happened, and my life kind of sucked because you're stuck inside of me, but that's over now. Things are better now. Way better. He had friends. He was a skip and a hop away from possibly being promoted to Jonin of all things. He had a girl that he was utterly over the moon for, who felt the same about him. He had respect as a worthwhile ninja and was getting more with every achievement he notched into his belt. Life was much improved for Naruto. Though the same definitely couldn't be said for the Kyuubi. Well, how wonderful for you that things finally improved years after I was placed inside of your disgusting meat sack of a body. Nothing has changed for me. I've been locked away inside of you humans, one after another for the better part of 8 decades. Naruto opened his mouth to speak, but was at a loss for words. There was no right way to talk about such a thing. Nothing he could tell the Kyuubi that would soothe the bitter Biju. I don't know what to say. There is nothing to say. You expect to coexist with me somehow? You can't begin to understand enough of my wrath to endure it. There are too many people out there who want to use you as a weapon. I'm trying to keep that from happening. It's funny how your way of preventing me from being used as a weapon is using me as a weapon. That seems to be defeating the purpose, don't you think? Naruto started to defend himself before stopping, a look of stunned insight on his face. You have a point. How could he ask for help to keep it from being used, when using it was the only interest he himself had ever had in it? It was a realization that just made him feel dirty. You're right. Of course I'm right, the Kyuubi crowed victoriously until it saw Naruto sit down on the surface of the water that flooded the mindscape. What are you doing? Naruto sat cross-legged and got himself comfortable, as though he planned on being there for quite some time. You just said it. I don't understand. People always tell me how hard-headed I am and how long it takes to get anything through my skull, so the sooner I start working on this, the better. The first step's listening, isn't it? So go ahead, talk. What? Naruto gave the Kyuubi a grin that was equal parts amusement and triumph. Throwing a being of nigh immeasurable power off of its game was more than a little gratifying. You've been stuck in here for 17 years, and before that you were stuck in my mom for however many years, and someone else before that for years. I'm sure you've got a lot of things to bitch about. I'm not going anywhere until you get everything off your chest. Anything that pisses you off. Go for it. Like you for starters. There you go. You're getting the idea. Come on. Keep going. Oh really? Do you want me to go chronologically, on a scale of least to most rage-inducing, or vice versa? Just let whatever comes to mind fly. Naruto exclaimed positively, arms waving wide, yelling in someone's face about what makes you mad makes you feel way better about it. Trust me. I won't leave until you're done. What if I want you to leave? Still not leaving until you're finished, Naruto said, eliciting a growl from the monster in the cage. Oh, what are you gonna do if I don't? Clang. Naruto didn't flinch the sight of claws the size of a building flying through the bars in his direction. They stopped short, just before they could reach him, courtesy of the seal, causing the deafening sound of iron banging to ring out. Was it fun trying to take a swing at me? He asked after the fact. I can't say complaining about all of your problems will feel as good as killing me probably would, but it's better than sitting in here letting it all build up even more. At this point, it was a battle of wills. The question was, who would win out? The stubbornness built up through the better part of a century of containment, or the intrigue and lack of other stimulating activities available to a 17-year-old tenacious ninja. Kaminari no Kuni, Island Turtle. Killer Bee wasn't necessarily the peacemongering type. After all, fighting gave him the chance to show all of the poor, ignorant masses one of the many things that made the Eight Tails Jinchuriki so great. Still, he wasn't a fool. There were clouds of war that had been building since the last blowout between hidden villages. For quite some time there had only been minor skirmishes that had been quickly covered up or negotiated down. That served to do nothing other than build up resentment on the side of those who were wronged. His own student and his brother's protege had been casualties of these constant on and off conflicts, and now B's two other students were holding on to that remaining anger. He wasn't going to tell them that it was needless to feel that way. The wounds were still very fresh from Omoi and Darui's deaths. His own were as well, but having long since understood the nature of what they did for a living and having met the person responsible for their deaths in battle, his desire for revenge had decreased. After he had done his part and battled Akatsuki for the sake of Ujito as well, that had only done more to reaffirm the kind of person Uzumaki Naruto was at his core. Your brother has come for you, B. Yeah. I can hear that gorilla from here, yeah no. B thought to the helpful Biju inside of him, a grin crossing his face, thanks anyway Edo. As the Hachibi had told him, it only took a little while longer for the Raikage to arrive, flanked by his bodyguards. With a look and a wave of his hand. Once he was certain that they were alone he made his way out to the rock at the base of the waterfall where Killer B was sitting. What are you doing here by yourself, B? The powerhouse of a shinobi said to his adopted brother, at a time like now, you need to be back in the village, somewhere our forces can keep an eye out for your well-being. Killer B kept his eyes on the waterfall in front of him as he addressed A, hanging out in the village was crampin' my style. Thought I'd chill out on the island for a little while. Can't be a crime how I spend my time. I looked around to make sure no one was around to see him be so vulnerable. He sat down on the rock next to B and waited for a moment before speaking again. You're upset, he declared, instead of asking, Ujito is doing much better by the way. She's eager to get back to work in the field, but I don't think I'll be sending her on assignment away from the village. Like with me. The Raikage let out a sigh. Times were rare when B didn't try to speak in some sort of rhyme. He knew that B was not a fan of his decree to keep him in the village with the title of Kumo's protector, but it was the only way he could think of to protect him. Times are getting dangerous again, he explained, Soraku, and what happened with Iwagakure was a hell of a wake-up call. What we've been doing hasn't been wrong, but it's also clear that Kumo hasn't been going far enough. Killer B's jaw locked up tightly, and for once, he chose not to say anything. In decades, nothing he had ever said had been enough to change his stubborn brother's mind on something. He wasn't willing to take an iron claw just for something that wouldn't affect his viewpoint anyway. Kumo had stayed militarized, even with the lack of a major war in the last 18 years. They had constantly stockpiled their forces, even sabotaged the attempts of others to gain strength. A had relaxed more on that policy than his predecessor as Raikage, but that was simply because of the clear strength that Kumo already held compared to any other single village. It was all necessary. Anyone who thought otherwise was just being ignorant to the nature of the kinds of people in power around the elemental nations. All-out war will eventually happen again. We're closer now than we have been in 15 years. Anyone with eyes across the landscape can feel that, everything happened in a cycle. It always had, and the time was coming where events would repeat themselves again. We're more prepared for that than the other villages, and every other village knows it. That is what will keep us safe. Sounds like you're counting on a war come in to serve, Killer B finally said, instead of stoppin' it you're just tryin' to be ahead o' the curve. The world isn't going to change, I said, grousing over B's apparent attitude. He was often more annoying than normal whenever he was troubled about something. You've been out there by my side. You've seen what it's like. How people are. Even with all you've done for our village, it took forever for them to eventually warm up to you as a Jinchuriki. If we're all out trying to kick each other's ass, who'll make sure the end of the world don't pass? Konohagakure no Sato, Naruto's apartment. Shikamaru took a seat and watched Naruto lazily sprawled out on his couch, boredly watching Konohamaru try to pop a water balloon. You know, if Ino catches you do anything involving training, she's gonna throw a fit. You're supposed to be taking it easy. Naruto looked over at his usual teammate and best friend momentarily before returning his attention back to the genin he was trying to instruct. I'm not doing anything hard. I'm teaching the Rasengan to Konohamaru, he explained to Shikamaru. It's going great, right Konohamaru? Gritting his teeth as he focused wholeheartedly on Naruto's instruction to try and pop the object in his hand with nothing but his chakra, Konohamaru let his feelings on his new training be known. Fucking water balloon. Why is something this lame the first step? You should try learning wind as an element, Naruto responded, smiling slightly as he reveled in the frustration of his would-be pupil. Now he could see why some teachers took a sadistic pleasure in the struggle of their more boisterous charges. Talk about a lame first step. You're still teaching him that jutsu? Shikamaru asked from the sideline. Didn't you hear? The Chunin exams are cancelled. Raising an eyebrow, Naruto sat up on his couch, setting his feet firmly on the floor. So? He did everything I told him he had to do for me to teach him. So what if there aren't any finals? He made it there in the first place, so he gets to learn it. Hanabi made it as well, and he was going to teach her in accordance to their agreement as well, but he wasn't going to bring that up in front of Konohamaru. He was just going to let that surprise amuse everyone around the two of them when they met in the next Chunin exams. Apparently having given up for the time being, Konohamaru let out a breath that he'd been holding while concentrating. The balloon in his hand no more popped than it had been before he'd started. This sucks. Can't you just tell me how to do this? I'm gonna tell you the same thing Ero-sensei told me, Naruto said, hopping off of the couch and guiding Konohamaru to his front door by the boy's shoulders. Work it out for yourself. You'll know why I want you to later, but not for a few years. Now come and see me whenever you pop it so I can watch you do it in front of me. Then you'll get the next step. It took Konohamaru until he was past the threshold of Naruto's apartment to realize that he had been escorted out. Wait, are you kicking me out? Yeah. Watching you do that was funny for the first 2 hours. And I don't want water all over my floor once you finally do get it, Naruto answered, entirely unashamed as he gave the Hokage's grandson a heart pat on the back. Good luck, Konohamaru. You'll get it in no time. With that, he shut the door behind him, shaking his head as he headed back inside. It'll take him a few weeks. Hanabi'll probably take a few days to get it, honestly. That bit of reasoning pissed him off. Good for her, but it was kind of annoying that she would pick it up way before he himself would have been able to. Damn prodigies. How long did it take you? Shikamaru asked, having forgotten that mundane aspect of their lives, what with all of the constant near-death experiences and training that came with their place in the Ninja Guardians. A bit longer than a month, Naruto said, choosing not to get caught up in a wave of nostalgia. Reminiscing wasn't why Shikamaru had come to see him. So what's up? You didn't drag yourself all the way across the village to watch me train Konohamaru or talk about old times. Shikamaru shook his head and pulled out a scroll that he tossed over to Naruto just as he sat back down. As he broke the seal and opened it up, Shikamaru pulled out a similar, official-looking document. I got mine this morning. There was one for you sitting in your mailbox, so I figure these were sent today. Naruto's eyes scanned over the characters on the page until the message they comprised made themselves clear to him. No way, he said, his eyes slowly widening as he mentally summarized all of the bureaucratic gobbledygook written out to him. They're thinking about promoting us. Shikamaru didn't seem nearly as jostled as his friend, mostly because he'd had time to process the decision and rationalize it in his own head. Aside from the work we did tracing Kabuto's origins, the whole route thing, and all of the missions we've been doing since we came back, they've got our records from when we were working at the capital as well. Naruto couldn't believe it. A step up the ladder was staring him in the face again. He hadn't even thought about getting a promotion with everything that had been going on around him since coming back to Konoha. But when he stopped to think about it, or more specifically, after Shikamaru had pointed it out, their body of work did warrant giving the idea some thought. I just got captured, Naruto said with a laugh. Don't they have to do some kind of thorough screening to make sure I'm not brainwashed, or turned, or something? That's what they've had Ino doing since you came back, Shikamaru said, having broken down the real reason Ino had been ordered to more or less stick to Naruto like glue until he was medically cleared. What a joke. Naruto's physical well-being would never be a genuine reason to keep him on the sidelines. Golden eyebrows raised up past Naruto's bangs. She was telling the truth about that. He said in surprise, huh. And here I thought it was just her way of trying to spend the night, to say the very least about what they had been doing with so much alone time together. To be fair, that's probably a reason why she did it without any kind of fuss, Shikamaru replied. They'll probably give you a psyche interview with someone who's not one of us later, but this was approved and dated before Neji and I came back and reported that you were missing. As of now this is legit. So what, do we have to take another test like the Chunin exam? Oh, God no. We get scored on a series of missions by more experienced Jonin who come with us. What exactly are we getting scored in? Taijutsu, ninjutsu, and genjutsu, plus tracking, teaching, interrogation, organization and leadership, strategy, and tactics to name a few others, Shikamaru explained as Naruto sat back near a window and lit up a cigarette. You need the 3 combat proficiencies and a few of the sub-qualifications to pass as a Jonin. If you score high enough on at least 2 sub-qualifications, they'll at least move you up to Takubutsu Jonin. Why do you know that? Even if his dad was a long-time Jonin, Shikamaru wouldn't have cared about that kind of thing in Naruto's mind. He certainly wouldn't have asked about it today, even after all of this did come up. Shikamaru gave Naruto a look as if to ask him if he were kidding, because that's what I want, he said, that's a specialist's position, which means they'll only ask you to do Jounin stuff that falls into your field. Aside from that, you're still seen as a Chunin as far as most other missions go, and they won't send me on many outside of the village if I score high in the most useless specialty of all. Teaching. No way. Then they'll probably saddle me with a genin team if I did that. I'm trying to avoid having to do any actual work, remember? He sort of joked before seeing that Naruto wasn't bouncing off of the walls at the chance to be a Jonin. What's wrong? It wasn't that Naruto was unhappy about it. He was still smiling. He just wasn't raising a gigantic stink and raising the dead with an impromptu celebration the way Shikamaru would have expected him to after receiving such news. Nothing's wrong. This is great, Naruto said, and he meant it. It just didn't necessarily show. The meaning was there, but the energy simply wasn't. We're gonna crush this exam. I'm gonna get promoted. Everything's going my way these days. Heh, finally, right. Shikamaru fixed him with a long, hard glance before letting out a sigh. You're still messed up in the head from the Iwa stuff, aren't you? It would have been too good to be true for him to get out of all of that with no adverse effects. Even if he physically bounced back the same as he ever was, there was little chance that he could go through that kind of an experience and remain as he had been. Shikamaru had originally chalked it up to Naruto being a little off, but the fact of the matter was that people didn't just block things like that out and move along. It stuck with them in some way. How it would stick with Naruto from here on out had yet to be seen. But at least it could have been worse. Naruto gave Shikamaru a funny look before letting out a snort, smoke billowing from his nose. No. If Sasuke is fine, I'm fucking great, he argued on his own behalf. Whatever happened to me, he got it worse. They actually tortured him. What Shikamaru said next caught Naruto entirely by surprise. Who says he's fine? Didn't Ino tell you where she was going today? No, Naruto said before a second, much less important thought hit him next. Wait, why'd she tell you? Meanwhile, with Ino, Uchiha clan district. Being a good friend oftentimes meant having your friends back and dealing with wearisome things for their sake or upon their request. After Ino's one-sided crush on Sasuke had gone the way of the dinosaur, she had basically ceased regular attempts at interacting with him. It was for the best really. She could speak to a brick wall and get the same amount of emotional response from it that she could have from Sasuke on her best day. After getting interested in Naruto, she never even thought about him unless she was having a boy talk with Sakura and he came up. So when Sakura came to get her that morning to ask her to head out to Sasuke's home with her, she hadn't exactly been enthused. Sakura, I know you're worried, but this is the kind of thing that's normal, Ino told her worried friend as they walked through the empty streets of the Uchiha clan district. That place gave her the creeps. She used to think it was just an added part of Sasuke's cool factor that he basically had an entire section of the village that belonged to him. Not so much any longer. It seemed like a museum, untouched since the night the clan was destroyed. Sasuke has been through some serious shit over the last few weeks. I mean, can you imagine? This was the sort of thing Sakura wanted to bring Ino along for. That specialization of hers in human psychology gave her a point of view that Sakura didn't have. Also, because she hadn't seen Sasuke in the same light as she did in quite some time, her perspective of his current state would be more unbiased. I just want to make sure he's alright, Sakura said, focusing on navigating her way to Sasuke's home. He hasn't been coming into the village much, and even when he does he's so much more distant. It's reminding me of how things were when we were just starting out as a team again. It's scaring me. Sasuke had never been the most sociable person, even when everything seemed to be going just fine. Once Ino had dropped her old crush on him, she could recognize just how startlingly frosty he had been back when they were all children, right up until graduation. Her boyfriend had somehow stricken up an odd friendship with him, based on one-upmanship, but Ino herself could never manage to drum up anything beyond a basic cordiality. He's not there, Ino said as Sakura started to make a turn that would have taken her to the front door of Sasuke's house. Before Sakura could ask where he could have been, Ino pointed in a direction and began leading her instead. He's a little farther along this way. Maybe he's training or something. A disgruntled Sakura could absolutely see Sasuke doing just that, despite the fact that he was still supposed to be healing. He'd better not be, she said. He doesn't heal like Naruto does, and even he's not doing anything right now. Well, that's just because Goldie listens to me when I ask him to do things, Ino gloated brightly. Also, bribery is really helpful with that. What do you bribe him with? Sakura asked before immediately regretting it when she saw the grin on Ino's face. Forget it. I don't want to know, she cut her off before she could go into any sort of detail. Before long, the two of them came to a tranquil shrine that sat at the top of a set of stone stairs. This was where Ino's sense of Sasuke's chakra had led her to, though Sasuke had never particularly struck her as the religious type. It seemed like it would be a waste of time to someone like him. Ino's eyes suddenly went wide when a good reason finally hit her. Sakura, what day is today? It's September - Sakura started to say before realizing why the date was an important thing. She had always been good with dates and memory-based things of that sort. Why she hadn't seen it sooner could have been chalked up to her worries over the thought of something being wrong with him because of his time as a prisoner. Do you think I should - She stopped when she figured that her friend was just as at a loss as she was. Ino wasn't even close to Sasuke in the slightest, but what she knew about him didn't give her much confidence that intruding on his time during such a hallowed day would be a good idea. Ino slowly shook her head, trying to come up with something helpful to say. I don't know. I mean, you show up out of the blue on the anniversary of his clan's massacre. He's not exactly the friendliest guy on a good day, she pointed out. Has he ever talked about it with any of you the entire time you've been a team? No, it was uncomfortable. None of them wanted to talk about it. Koji had never been one to broach an uncomfortable topic in the first place. Kakashi wasn't exactly a fan of talking about the past in his own right, and Sakura just knew that anything having to do with the massacre would cause Sasuke pain. I was hoping that settling things with Itachi would have given him some peace of mind. There's a good chance he still needs some time to let it all sink in, Ino said, putting her logic hat on to try and utilize her psychology experience. It's only been just about a week since he accomplished the entire reason he's lived his whole life for the last 10 years. That's it. It's done. Most people didn't achieve the reason for their existence by the time they were 17. They definitely didn't find a new goal to dedicate their whole being to just like that. It also couldn't have come at a worse time for Sasuke as well, right before the anniversary of his entire family's demise. He probably didn't want to so much as look another human being in the face for the next 24 hours. What are you both doing here? A chill went down Ino's spine from the frost on Sasuke's tone. Of course, even with her being a censor he still would have gotten the drop on her. She and Sakura stopped and watched Sasuke walk out of the front of the shrine with heavy bags under his eyes. He looked like something or another had been keeping him up. Hey, Sasuke, Ino greeted, trying to manage some cheer and play dumb to the fact that he was not happy to see either of them on his clan grounds. just stopping in to check on you. Sasuke's gaze narrowed on the pretty blonde girl who tried to stand tough despite its piercing nature. That's not your job. She wondered if it had to be a part of her job just for her to drop by. Well, you were in that same hell of a mess that Goldie was, and we are friends. We were classmates at least, and your teammates are definitely my friends, so. Ino finished with a shrug before looking to Sakura for how to have a conversation with the least willing participant in all of Konoha. It might not be Ino's job, but it's my place to, Sasuke-kun, Sakura insisted. I just figured you would have liked to see someone else today that cares about you. Skepticism covered Sasuke's face, and Ino wondered if Sakura had managed to cut through his bad attitude. It was only temporary though, as he quickly returned to his original point, he wanted them out of there. Not today. Go, Sasuke quickly shot back before pausing for a moment. I'll talk to you later. With that, he went back inside of the shrine. Sakura frowned but nodded and began heading back the way she had come with Ino in tow. At least she had confirmed that Sasuke was alright for the time being. It had been the reason she had come in the first place. But now definitely wasn't the best time to gauge how recent events had affected him. Well, if it's any consolation, that went a lot less explosively than I thought it would have, Ino tried to joke, only for it to fall flat. Sasuke had to send them away. While he wouldn't have wanted outsiders on his property uninvited under normal circumstances, let alone on a day like today, now there was a much more realistic reason to want Sakura and Ino far away from the Uchiha clan district. Right now, he was dealing with a very unwelcome visitor inside the hidden Naka shrine area of the district. And he didn't want anyone near this person until he got answers first. He didn't want anyone he actually liked or cared about around someone this dangerous at all. As he returned to the secret area only accessible to Uchiha clan members, Sasuke glared at the man in the swirl-patterned mask leaning carelessly against the wall. You've got some nerve getting anywhere near here right now, Madara, Sasuke spat disbelievingly. To think that this impostor would have found his way into the inner sanctum of his clan. It made him burn with rage. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't rip your heart out. Other than because you physically can't, you mean? Toby said, trying to needle Sasuke further. That temper, that passion. That's the thing that sets you apart from Itachi more than anything else. Don't say his name. Sasuke snapped, he's dead. I killed him. It's over. There's no reason for anyone to ever acknowledge him again. Itachi's just a memory now. A dark memory in the minds of all of the people here. Soon he won't even be that. And that's the way I want it. Toby let out a hiss of false pain. So cold, Sasuke. And you used to love Itachi so much. Things change. Not everything, Toby continued, he obviously still loved you. After all, why else wouldn't he have dodged? Why didn't you dodge? His final attack, a straightforward Chidori right to the heart. Itachi didn't move an inch and seemingly allowed his younger brother to strike him down. Sasuke's own words, asking the exact same thing to Itachi's motionless body at the end of their fight rattled around inside of his head, echoing off of every corner. And every time it did, it only served to raise his temper further. His Sharingan flared to life, but the only thing that stayed his hand from attacking was the area that they were in. He had already tried to attack Toby in Iwagakure and had failed to even make contact with him. Anything he could do that would potentially damage the infuriating mystery man would also destroy Naka Shrine. I didn't come here to fight, Toby declared, his tone shifting to one of grave severity. After all, you and I are the last of the Uchiha clan. And since that is indeed the case, you and I should both know about the truth behind our clan's downfall. He'd planned for this. The bastard in the mask had confronted Sasuke in a place he wouldn't wreck in order to rid himself of an annoyance, and since he wasn't attacking Sasuke first, Sasuke wouldn't force the issue. It was the only reason nothing had been destroyed yet. He put himself at risk by even coming to Konoha in the first place. But it was a calculated risk, as he came to a place that was impossible for the village to patrol. A place where he would have time to do what he needed and then leave in secret. Toby's confidence showed in his body language. His complete lack of any caution in dealing with Sasuke up close. It's clear by now that you won't simply hear me out, so I came to visit you here, in this place, on this day, to make absolutely sure that you would sit and listen. If anything, the sheer audacity of showing himself was enough to pique Sasuke's interest. If Tobi's reason for being there wasn't to kill him for meddling with Akatsuki, it would behoove him to find out just what he wanted. Sasuke took a series of deep breaths to calm himself down. He had a feeling that this would be far from the only time he would feel severe vexation today. The next thing that comes out of your mouth better be damned good, he said, doing his best to keep a calm and measured voice as he sparked up a chidori in his hand, and you'd better pray to whatever god you worship that I believe it, Madara. Otherwise, just being in this place won't keep me from doing whatever I have to do to rip you apart. A chance to speak was all Tobi could have hoped for. If there's a god, it's not worth worshipping. The hand life wound up dealing you is proof enough of that. Omegakur, Pain's Tower. Deidara's report filled Pain with rage. The sheer audacity of Orochimaru to do what he had done. To take the power of the Sanbi and make deformed hybrids of human beings and miniature Biju. While it took a disturbing spark of brilliance to think of perverting the human condition in such a way, the same kind of brilliance that attracted Akatsuki to Orochimaru in the first place, this was simply something that could not be tolerated. He wanted to create his own army of mindless monsters to serve his own ends. He was using something that was meant to achieve Akatsuki's goals and making a mess of things. So now there were two options. He could either go after Orochimaru himself or secure another Jinchuriki in the meantime on his own, to ensure that the job was done correctly. Decisions. Which was more important for the time being? He had to make a choice and then move on to the next thing. He wanted results. Akatsuki had worked too hard, he had sacrificed too much, come too far to simply allow things to slip from his grasp. If you wanted something done right, you had to do it yourself, after all. Omake, till death do us what? 8. The morning of her intended duel with Shizuka, Ino awoke and prepared herself before the sun had ever even come up. She left her family's home under the dead of early morning darkness and marched with purpose to the site of her fated conflict. What she didn't expect to see upon arriving was the subject of the to-be fight, her boyfriend Naruto, standing and staring in complete shock and awe. Immediately, Ino rushed up to him. Goldie. What are you doing here? He wasn't supposed to be there. How did he even find out about what was supposed to happen that morning? And why wasn't he paying her any mind? After reaching his side, Ino followed the direction of his gaze and saw what had garnered his attention. The training field that would have served as the setting for Ino and Shizuka's battle had already been torn to shreds. Rows of trees had been hacked down, square yards of ground had been ripped asunder. In short, it looked like a fight had already taken place. What happened? I was heading here to try and talk this whole thing down, Naruto said. On the way here, I found Lee while he was doing morning stuff. Lee fought Shizuka, Naruto continued. I don't even know what happened. It all went down so fast, by the time I realized what was happening they'd already started. And? You tell me. You're a better sensor than I am. There was no need to. Before Ino could even try and put her sensing technique to the test to try and keep tabs on the two combatants, Lee jogged his way up to the two of them from the wrecked training field, body covered in cuts, bruises, and scuffs, jumpsuit torn, bowl cut slightly askew. Despite all of that, the wide smile on his face was unmistakable. Ino-san. Good morning. Yeah, Ino replied at the sight of Shizuka being held underneath Lee's right arm. She was completely unconscious. Lee, did you do that to her? He looked down at Shizuka under his arm before nodding frantically to Ino's query. Yes. I ran into Naruto-kun during my early morning training and decided to accompany him to this meeting. Ino looked over at Naruto who simply shrugged in return. Why did you fight her? She asked as what seemed like an obvious follow-up question. Rock Lee grabbed his chin in thought, inadvertently dropping Shizuka to the ground with an audible thud. She seemed happy to see Naruto-kun, but not with me here as well. I would have excused myself when I realized it, but she challenged me before I could. At that, Lee turned to Naruto and bowed profusely. I am so sorry. I did not mean to ruin your meeting. But she was so powerful. He picked himself back up with an expression of pure, unbridled joy at getting to take on someone so powerful. I had to begin releasing some of the gates to defeat her. Ah, what a challenge. Naruto's face twisted oddly as he tried to keep the smile off of his face. It's alright, Lee. But she'll be okay, right? I only knocked her out, Lee explained. Some bones may be broken from blocking a few of my blows and taking a few of them outright, but she was still awake when I first picked her up. Ino stooped down by Shizuka and began working on some of her injuries. I'll take care of her. We'll make sure she gets to a hospital. Don't worry, Lee. Gratefully, Lee bowed to Naruto and Ino one last time. If she wakes up, could you thank her for me? Such a splendid kunoichi, I could not have asked for a better battle. Having spoken his mind, Lee dropped down into a squat and began to run by kicking his legs forward from that position, one at a time. Back to my training then. Goodbye. Rock Lee was easily one of their odder friends, but he was definitely a great guy. Ino looked down at Shizuka and sighed. Clearly, they weren't going to be having their little duel today. As she finished touching up Shizuka's combat wounds, she found Naruto's hand resting on her shoulder. She looked up to see him standing over her, a wide grin on his face. I know what you did. Or at least what you were going to do. Fight Shizuka. She confessed before he could say it himself. How do you know? Sakura told me yesterday. Damn Sakura. Stupid forward girl, snitching on her. Of course, that didn't explain why Naruto wasn't upset. When fighting was the last thing he wanted Ino to try and do. Well, if that's the case, why are you smiling so hard? If anything, Naruto's smile grew even larger. A few laughs even escaped him as he thought about it. Because Lee beat her, he said, almost gleefully, I never did. I just threw my weight around and showed I was stronger than her. He beat her straight up. That means he has a better claim than I do. So you're saying Rock Lee is a more legit fiancé candidate than you are? Ino asked, getting her hopes up for good reason when Naruto nodded. Ino forgot about her patient and hopped to her feet, throwing her arms around Naruto's neck and letting him swing her around. Hell yes. I don't have to talk you into that one-night stand after all. Naruto stopped celebrating and pulled away from the hug. What? Figuring that the jig was up, Ino averted her eyes away from Naruto's shamefully. Well, back when I had no idea what I was going to do to help you with this, I might have made a deal with someone saying that if she helped me and we got Shizuka out of here I owed her 3 favors involving you. More shocked than angry or appalled, Naruto could only take a step back and take that information in. So let me get this straight. Your plan for getting help to keep me from being whored out, involved whoring me out. He sounded less than impressed, but not totally against it. When you put it that way, wow, that really doesn't sound like a good idea at all. You know what? It might make me look like a hypocrite, but honestly, I'm kind of alright with it, likely because it would have involved his girlfriend consenting his doing adult things with another, likely gorgeous, girl. Jiraiya would have approved. Then again, he wasn't exactly Naruto's moral compass. Ino seemed surprised. Really? Yeah, Naruto admitted, my idea wasn't much better. Now it was Ino's turn to be confused. What was he talking about? Of course his idea was better. It had worked. The buck had been passed to someone else, fair and square, but Lee won the fight. Eventually realization as to just how lucky they were dawned on her. Wait. Lee wasn't your idea then? No, he just showed up, Naruto explained lamely. When we got here, Shizuka threatened him so he'd leave us alone, and Lee took it as a straight-up challenge. Thank God for Rock Lee. Ino couldn't help but agree. Yes. Thank God for Rock Lee. Chapter 73, Anyone But You. After being informed by Shikamaru of the plans that Konoha's upper brass had for them, Naruto couldn't get himself together fast enough to head out and get it confirmed straight from the highest source available. Hiruzen was not surprised to see Naruto so soon after the decision was made and sent out, nor was he surprised by the energetic response from the young man. He was older and wiser than the little boy who used to prank others for attention, but there was still a lot of enthusiasm inside of him. So, I heard you were gonna promote me, Naruto said with a grin as he sidled into the Hokage's office, entirely appointment-free. Just so you know, I'm perfectly fine with getting a genin team. I'm great with kids. When's the next graduation again? A shiver went down the Sandaime Hokage's spine at the thought of Naruto actually being in a position of influence and authority over 3 Academy fresh genin. From his interactions with Kano Amaru and Hanabi, yes, he would be a good teacher, but the village was not ready for that sort of team, and it was uncertain if it ever would be. "You're not getting a genin team," he stated flatly, as seriously as he could, "not anytime soon. Besides, you have to be promoted to Jonin first." "Well, we can solve half of that problem right now. Promote me." "Naruto." "Okay, fine," Naruto acquiesced, much to Sarutobi's relief until he realized that this was Naruto. His ego would only allow him to admit fault in a situation such as this only so much. "Send me on the mission for the test, then promote me." Decades of politics gave the wizened old Hokage an incredible poker face, yet Naruto was often able to render it a twitching mess within minutes. "We don't just pick random missions to send you on for your Jonin exam," he explained. "We carefully select the sort of assignments that would allow you to show us everything that you would need to prove that you were ready for the position." Carefully selecting sounded like something that he would have to wait quite some time for. Patience was never one of Naruto's virtues. "Well, how long will that take? Me and Shika are ready to get this show on the road." Instead of a glare, Hiruzen's stare turned to one of complete skepticism. Knowing better, "Okay, I'm ready to get the show on the road. Shikamaru isn't really as happy as I am about the idea." "That's just fine, because you won't be going on the same missions regardless," Hiruzen informed the teenage Jinchuriki, to the chagrin of the latter. Naruto's jaw dropped in disbelief. It was Team 10. What did he mean they wouldn't be going together? It didn't make sense to him. What? Oh, come on. What fun would getting promoted be if I couldn't do it with someone who'd actually celebrate with me? Once again, Hiruzen wasn't willing to bite on the idea that Nara Shikamaru would do anything of the sort. Shikamaru of all people would celebrate. "Stop poking holes in my arguments, old man. I'm trying to make a point here." "A very dull point," Hiruzen jabbed in return, smirking momentarily when he was able to elicit an irritated response from Naruto. "We can't judge two Jonin candidates on the same missions when they're the ones who are supposed to be leading it. If we did it your way, you would be going on two missions, one entirely irrelevant to your promotion." Naruto thought about it for all of half a second. "Okay." The Hokage sighed and grabbed at the bridge of his nose to fight back the Naruto-induced migraine he could just feel was coming on strong. "If you both went on each other's missions, evaluations would be more difficult for the both of you." "Well, just as long as I can go on his test missions then, they don't have to score me during it. Or they can score me twice. Whichever one is worse." "I don't mind," Naruto said with a confident grin and a shrug before his expression became more earnest. "Team 10 is like a family to me, and this test is special. I never had a brother or anything, but Shikamaru is the closest thing I'll probably ever have to one. Even if it makes it harder for me, I'll do it. I want to be there and make sure he has the best chance possible to get what he deserves." No matter how much Hiruzen butted heads with Danzo over the years, his late friend and rival had a point that he had never really been able to dispute. He had a notable soft spot at times. While he liked to believe that he was as tough on enemies as any Kage should have been, when it came to the people of his village, especially some of the ones that had a particular place in his heart, he was very lenient. Naruto was one of those people. He had made concessions for that boy in the past over things much bigger than his possible placement on a test mission. If he wanted to basically take his exam twice instead of once, that was his business. "Whenever Shikamaru's Jonin test that he's meant to lead is put together, I won't bar you from being on the squad," Hiruzen relented. "It's really up to him. Test takers oftentimes get their choice of available shinobi for missions aside from the proctor anyway. I'm just saying, it makes things needlessly difficult for you. Please. Something like this can't stop me. The Jonin exam isn't like the Chunin exam. You don't get to just take it every half year if you fail. If you don't perform properly, it could be years before you are given another look for a promotion. I already told you, it doesn't matter to me. I'll get there somehow," Naruto said determinedly, the small, heartfelt smile still present on his face. "I just want to get there with people that actually give a fuck, you know." After a moment of silence, Naruto cleared his throat and changed the topic to something less sappy. "So since this is all coming up after the whole mess with Soraku and Iwa, is Sasuke getting a promotion test too?" At that, Hiruzen paused, surprising Naruto. He thought it would be a sure thing that if his dysfunctional ass was getting a look for a Jonin position, Sasuke would be as well. He hadn't been prepared for the fact that apparently it wasn't. Hiruzen folded his wrinkled hands over one another as he considered the issue. Sasuke. I was thinking about it, he admitted, smiling a bit when he thought about all of the progress Kakashi reported he'd seen while he was in charge of Team 7, the boy has a lot of talent. He's come a long way, and I'm not talking in terms of his ninjutsu. He seems more stable. Not quite as angry as he was when he was a boy. I'll take part of the credit for that, Naruto said, none too humbly. He doesn't have so much hate to throw around when he's aiming most of it at me. We piss each other off pretty well, but hey, what are friends for? Hiruzen shook his head at the young man's exuberant demeanor. But this was more serious than Naruto really knew. The inside of Sasuke's head was not a pretty place. He needs to come in for a mental evaluation, as do you. Hiruzen fought the urge to roll his eyes at Naruto's mischievous grin. His girlfriend tripled as a certified therapist in addition to her duties as a field shinobi and an interrogation specialist, so it wasn't like it would be hard to get him to do his. Sasuke has been avoiding it. I won't make the sort of call that would put him in that important a position until I'm certain he can handle it. Sasuke's capabilities on the battlefield were not in question, and while his drive to fight for others and protect his colleagues could be iffy at times, he had no record of deserting his comrades. That didn't change the fact that he was still a mentally fragile boy. He had dealt with a lot over the years, between Orochimaru's seal, dealing with his brother again, and more. In the back of Hiruzen's mind, no matter how capable Sasuke grew, he would always see a part of him as the catatonic 7-year-old boy in the hospital the morning after the Uchiha clan was destroyed. He was a constant living, breathing reminder of one of the Sandaime Hokage's biggest regrets during his long tenure as leader of the village. Come on, old man, Naruto said, cutting through the Hokage's sullen introspection. Sasuke is a moody son of a bitch, but he's not that bad. Besides, he got his man, right? Uchiha Itachi, the source of all of his crazy, he's dead. Sasuke put him in the ground. It's over. Meanwhile, Uchiha clan district, Naka Shrine. Sasuke's brain had the consistency of pudding. Whatever he had expected from the story before Madara had told it, he hadn't expected it to hit so close to home, or to fill so many holes in what he'd known of the massacre back when it had occurred. He didn't know how to feel about any of what he had just been given in regards to the final fate of his clan. Well, that wasn't exactly true. Anger was the first emotion that welled up. It was his default setting for most of the things that happened in his life that he didn't understand or agree with. Disbelief was the next. The Uchiha clan had shed blood in the name of Konoha. Had fought countless battles for the safety and sanctity of the village. Had dedicated themselves to overseeing the day-to-day peace of the population. For God's sake, they had been one of the two driving forces that led to its formation almost a century ago. Why? Why would the village blame them for the attack of the Nine Tails? Why would their paranoia cause them to isolate the clan and put so much pressure on them that a coup was the only option they saw possible? Why was he even listening to this, other than the fact that he couldn't kill the masked bastard or force him to go away? But it all made sense. His clan hadn't always lived in that one part of the village eventually designated as the Uchiha clan district. Not entirely. Yet they were all packed together on top of each other. Adult shinobi still living at home with their parents, despite the fact they could get their own lodgings elsewhere in Konoha. All of the attention on him in the academy personally, not because he was good, but because they were keeping a close eye on him as a future problem. Come to think of it, an Uchiha clan member had never even come close to leading the village. Itachi's placement in Umbu was the only time they'd gotten any kind of position so prestigious. It was why their father had seen it as such a big deal. And yet, it seemed it was only another chance for the village to keep closer tabs on the clan. And have their agent that would eventually strike at the heart of the clan to wipe them all off the face of the planet. But how could you accept something that flew directly in the face of everything that you had believed in and had lived your entire life by for the last 10 years? Toby could see just what his little history lesson had done to Sasuke. Emotionally, the boy was a kite being blown about in the wind. Sasuke wasn't exactly the picture definition of stable, even on a good day. But that was just it. He needed Sasuke to be volatile. He didn't necessarily need the boy to stand with him, didn't need him to fight for his cause. Sasuke was a wild card at best. He would only have use as a pawn that would get him what he wanted, and the less he thought about his actions, the easier it would be. He just needed Sasuke's instability to create enough of a distraction to give him a chance to do what was required. It wouldn't take much more at this point. He was clearly so frazzled, there was little left to do other than to drive the final stake home. Itachi loved the village more than the clan, so to prevent a civil war he enlisted my help to slaughter them all, Toby said, but his love for you was even greater than that. He did as he was told, his only condition being that no one was to lay a hand on you. If Itachi loved me so much, he should have known what this would do to me. He bellowed, killing me with everyone else would have been more merciful. And he let me live, out of some guilt trip, so that I could be the one to put him down. And for what? Also he could feel redeemed in the end. Sasuke's rage and sadness were swelling. Toby could feel it as though it were tangible, something he could grab onto and manipulate with his hands. Toby's words would do just fine, however. No. It was out of purely selfish love. Itachi could endure walking this earth with the burden of destroying your clan on his shoulders. But he couldn't live with the thought of killing you. He walked next to Sasuke, looking just past him, noting that the last Uchiha of Konoha didn't budge. Anyone but you, Sasuke. Anyone but you. No. Itachi was a monster. Itachi was a monster that didn't care about anyone other than himself and his own strength. Itachi was a monster who slaughtered the entire clan, killed their parents in cold blood, and made him watch the entire thing as though he had been there in person. Itachi was his brother who carried him home when he'd worked himself to exhaustion trying to live up to their father's high expectations. Itachi was the brother who went out of his way to teach him how to be a better ninja, even taking him on a few missions. Itachi was the brother who always tried to make time for Sasuke, and apologized when he couldn't. Itachi was a monster that did terrible things. He was also his brother who had given what he could to protect him. And Sasuke had killed him, all because he had been put in an impossible situation where there was no winning, there was only a choice of who and how many would die by the end. A grin formed behind Toby's mask as he could see the pattern in Sasuke's eyes begin to change. This was beautiful. It was absolutely perfect. This village lives in peace through the lies that your brother and your entire family were buried to protect, Toby said, speaking softly to his clansmen. Your friends live their lives, ignorantly cursing the name of the one who saved them from dying in fire. The one who sacrificed everything to make sure that you survived. But you're the one that took his life in the end. You've become Konoha's perfect little weapon, the one who could finally do the very thing they've always wanted done since the beginning. He moved inches away from Sasuke's ear and whispered the rest. You wiped out what was left of the Uchiha clan, Sasuke. Well done. Moving back slightly, he saw the red of Sasuke's eyes transformed into 3 intersecting ellipses with a black dot of a pupil at the center. It doesn't feel good, does it? You have all of these feelings, but no focus for your hatred, Toby said in an understanding tone. I'm afraid one of the men responsible is dead and gone, but the other still lives. Still resides over the village you've fought for all these years. And he's never told you. If he had it his way, you would never know. Why would he tell you? You're such a good little pawn. And if there's one thing the Hokage needs, it's good soldiers like you, Sasuke. He didn't wait around for Sasuke's response, or to see if there would even be one. Toby teleported away, having seen to what he had infiltrated Konoha to do. Whatever happened next didn't matter. The seed had already been planted, and with the formation of the Mangakyou Nan, the pot was soon to stir. Uzumaki Clan Temple. Checking in on Naruto was one of Jiraiya's favorite things to do nowadays. Being around when he was stumbling his way through adolescence was fun enough, but it could be a pain in the backside more often than not. Now, he could watch him come into his own as a functional adult. He could watch him get stronger, and reach life milestones. Milestones like his first girlfriend, getting the chance to be a Jonin, and building his own home on his clan's property. It was just the thing he needed to calm down after how angry he had been the other day. He still wanted to rearrange Onaki's face into an unsolvable jigsaw puzzle, and Orochimaru was still around the top of his list of chief concerns, but there was just something about watching a contractor crew worth of Naruto's laying the groundwork on the foundation of what was to be his new house that set him at ease. I'll pray for that Yamanaka girl whenever you convince her to shack up with you in that thing, Jiraiya joked, sitting inside of the restored mask temple with the original Naruto who was supervising the work of his clones. I mean, you can probably survive the roof caving in on you because of shoddy workmanship. I'm not so sure she can. Naruto rolled his eyes and fake laughed, splitting his attention between his godfather and overseeing his copies to make sure that they didn't slack off. He didn't want to start hiring actual crews for something like this when he knew he could do this much by himself. Oh, screw you. I can build a house. You say that like it's not a big deal, Jiraiya muttered. So how are you doing, really? After what happened on the last mission? Naruto let out a groan. Of course there was a catch to Jiraiya's little visit to his clan's property. Otherwise, Jiraiya would have just broken into his house or dropped in on him on the street. How many people are gonna ask me that? I'm fine. He'd heard it from every person on the street that knew his name since he'd come back. Granted, it was good that people showed any kind of consideration as to his well-being nowadays, but shouldn't it have been obvious how he was doing? He was up and around, and he wasn't whispering to himself in shadowy corners, so he wasn't losing his mind. Sure, there were a few nights where he found himself locked in a never-ending battle where he had to cut through enemy after enemy that came his way, a la Iwagakure, but that would go away eventually, wouldn't it? Just making sure, Jiraiya said. Even if he could imagine how tired Naruto was of hearing it, it was still somewhat his responsibility to be plugged into his state of mind. A lot of people put in the situation you were don't come back the same, if they come back at all. We found a way to break out of prison, Naruto rebutted. We would have found a way to get out of Iwa somehow, even with an entire army breathing down their necks. If we hadn't gotten there when we did, Oniki would have stepped in to handle you himself. You aren't ready to tangle with the Kage, kid, Jiraiya said. I'm not saying that to belittle what you can do now, or to inspire you to some kind of breakthrough. It's just a fact. If you can't beat me, you can't take on any of them. They would have been wiping up whatever was left of him off of the nearest rock face had he fought Oniki, if there had been anything left of him after the Chuchikage used his trademark jutsu on him. With more time, there wasn't a doubt in Jiraiya's mind that Naruto could and would be able to handle himself against any ninja walking the face of the planet, but until then, Naruto didn't like the idea that he still wasn't ready. Most ninja could accept the fact that there were people more dangerous than them in that grand pecking order of ninja society. He personally never could. Even when he would have been pureed by a Jonin as a genin, he barely cared. He'd spent years closing the gap between himself and the many bad people in the world that wanted to cause him and his loved ones harm, so to hear that there was still so much further to go was not easy to stomach. Well, you did do a nice job of fixing this old place up. Jiraiya changed the subject to something more comfortable as he got up from his seat. If this is what I can expect for quality, it might not be so bad. As he walked around the temple and into the room that contained all of the masks that gave the location its name, Jiraiya took a moment to look over the numerous creations displayed on the wall. It was a unique clan aspect Naruto could boast in the future that no others could. Every clan had to have their quirky novelty to set them apart, even a clan of one. Jiraiya went still as he noticed the symbol on one mask in particular. It was one that he had seen countless times, and he had come to know very well. There's no way. He thought to himself before bringing up the issue out loud. Brat, have you put this mask on yet? Naruto shook off his introspection once Jiraiya posed his question. I haven't tried any of them except for the one I told you about. The one that possessed my clone. He was never going to forget which mask that was, having mentally labeled it as the one to definitely stay away from. As a matter of fact, he didn't even want to look at the masks anymore, turning his attention back to the job his clones were doing outside. Oh yeah, this house is gonna look so awesome when I'm done. Jiraiya kept staring at the inside of the mask in his hand, pondering the chances of it working the way he figured it might. Well, there was only one way to find out. Worst case scenario, he was wrong and it wouldn't do anything, right? Jiraiya placed the mask on his face and felt a surge of familiar energy rush through him. Just as quickly as he put it on, he took it off, his wide eyes morphing from a toad-like pattern to their normal color and form, the deepened red marks around his eyes returning to the thin vertical lines that they usually were. Holy shit, Jiraiya whispered to himself, putting the mask back on again after settling himself down. This mask generates natural energy. Once again, he put the mask back on his face and reveled in the feeling of the chakra flowing through him. He didn't have to gather it on his own, which meant he could move. He could actually move. Naruto looked away from his oversight of his new home's construction and saw Jiraiya with a mask on his face. He instantly recoiled in terror at the potential horrors the mask held. Don't do that. Those things are dangerous. You're damn right they're dangerous, Jiraiya commented in agreement, despite the fact that he was still wearing the mask. Don't you put this one on until I say you can, or else you will die. Naruto frowned and tilted his head in confusion. Then why are you wearing it? Jiraiya grinned behind the mask. Well, obviously, because I can. He pointed to the piece of mystical artwork on his face. This mask forces natural energy into your body. All he got from his short explanation was a blank stare. Right. I didn't teach you about that yet. That didn't stop Naruto from trying to figure out what one of his clan's masks did. It gives you chakra. Jiraiya stopped him before he could get the wrong idea about what it was. It's not an advantage unless you can control it, he said. If you can't, you turn to stone. At least that's how my style of senjutsu works if it fails. Once more, there was nothing to show for his words to his godson, right? Again, you have no idea what I'm saying. Okay, until I get a better chance to explain it, this mask is very useful for a handful of people. If anyone else puts it on, they'll die. You included. Got it. Naruto gave a thumbs up in response. That was basically the approach he had been taking with every mask on that wall to begin with, that they could all kill him. He spared a glance at his wall full of the aforementioned masks. Naruto was beginning to notice a pattern. All of the masks that actually did something came with some incredibly freaky ability that had the potential to be fatal for the wearer. Most of them didn't do anything at all, but the ones that did really did something. Jiraiya then began to cackle. This is amazing. I feel like a young, strapping lad, furiously beating his meat for the first time. It was at that point that Naruto chose to simply bail out of the temple as Jiraiya continued to celebrate. While he normally would have been one to celebrate right alongside with him for whatever reason he was celebrating for, he wanted no part of Jiraiya's weirdness today. Something told him while he slowly backed out of the building that it was above his pay grade for now. Naruto shook his head at the man who was godfather and one of his mentors and influences. He was a complete head case sometimes, and it wasn't an act. He just knew when to turn it off and be serious. What he'd said earlier, about Naruto still not being in the Uchiha Jonaki's league, he'd had a point. Even if Naruto had been healthy and hadn't had to fight through an army by the time the Uchiha reached the battlefield, what kind of chance would he have really had? How much of a chance would he have against Jiraiya? Could he stand up to Tsunade long enough for it to be an accomplishment, or would she smash his head like a watermelon within a handful of tries? Would the Hokage still turn him into an orange and blue smear in the grass and dirt, even at his advanced age? The entire point of his joining the Guardian Ninja, of leaving Konoha to test himself with the dangerous workload that came with the position, of training with Jiraiya and putting himself and others around him in danger to learn to better utilize the Kyuubi's chakra was so he could deal with Akatsuki without anyone needing to save him. That included saving him from the aftermath of those conflicts. He needed to be better, because he was going to be a Jonin soon, at least if he had anything to say about it. His responsibilities were going to be bigger than ever. Not just the ones he would have to the village, but to his loved ones and to himself. It put a creep of fear into his chest. The good kind. The kind that usually meant there was a challenge worth living up to. Bring it on. Tetsu no Kuni. Progress was going well as far as Orochimaru considered with his scientific endeavors. The samurai response that had been sent to investigate and exterminate the source of several villages' destruction only served as an even better test for his artificial Jinchuriki. Even with their advanced chakra manipulating capabilities, the samurai that arrived to do battle were no match for his creations. It was a glorious sight. The samurai were a formidable fighting force. Even the ninja refused to trifle with them. But that in of itself came with problems of its own for the samurai. Because they had rarely dealt with ninja, when they couldn't force a direct battle, they were at a disadvantage to standard shinobi tactics. That wasn't even accounting for Orochimaru's methods of operating. They were ill-prepared to deal with them. The only way they would engage him was if he needed a stiffer test for his project, so maybe one day they would get a taste of how fearsome the fruits of his intellect and labor could be. Orochimaru rested, looking over the smoldering remains of another successful test. He licked his lips in anticipation of putting his artificial Jinchuriki ki to use in the field properly. But even with all of this success, something felt off. He couldn't put his finger on just what it was though. Everything he had endeavored to do over the last few years had paid off. He had the entire finances of Gato Corporation in his back pocket to fund anything his heart desired. He had the manpower to make Otagaku a viable force for him to use. His experiments were paying off now more than ever. He was stronger now than he had been at any time ever in his life, and every day seemed to be coming up with new ways to utilize that vast power. But it was just so boring. There hadn't been anything to truly challenge him in quite some time. And now he wondered if there ever would be. There used to be a time when he feared every day of his life. When he would defend his secrets as though his very existence depended on it. Now, he was just a hair away from having all of his nasty little dealings done in the daylight. All because he wanted to feel some kind of thrill out of what he was doing. Orochimaru frowned down at the notes he had been taking on the progress of his project and rolled up the scroll he had been writing on. How dull, he mused to himself, I want something to get my blood pumping again. The rush that came from breaking nature's careful little designs with nothing more than your own intellect was fine, but he wanted a test. He turned his head upon noticing the presence of Karen. The red-haired scientist seemed frightened by something, but not at the prospect of disturbing him during his time of private introspection. Curious? Yes. Orochimaru asked, a thin eyebrow raised in interest. Karen let out a shiver, her gaze moving back and forth between Orochimaru and whatever she was sensing in the distance. Something's coming, she told him, something strong. It's dash, oh god. In the air. The cry from one member of Orochimaru's nearby entourage got his attention next. Putting away his things, he stood and noticed a larger avian figure in the cloudy skies than there should have been for that area. If he focused, he could actually see two figures on its back. A smile slowly started to spread across his face until laughter started rumbling from his throat. He calmly paced into the middle of his own forces as they all prepared for an attack. Orochimaru simply held his hand up to keep them from acting rashly. Well, this is quite the pleasant surprise. By now, he could clearly see the blue-haired woman flying the airborne paper construct above them, Konan. And you brought a friend as well. With Konan was a tall, skinny man wearing the common Akatsuki cloak. He had orange hair tied back in a long ponytail and piercings visible all over his face. He stared down blankly at Orochimaru with nothing but ill intentions in mind. You don't look particularly familiar, the white-skinned shinobi said, obviously recognizing the killing intent being sent his way. How could he not? It was paralyzing half of his forces at that exact moment. Have I threatened or experimented on you before? The man's expression didn't so much as change, as long as it took for this moment to come. I was expecting something wittier or more sarcastic out of you, he said. You disappoint me, Orochimaru. Then again, you're very good at that. Orochimaru spared him another glance, wondering just why this person figured it was alright for him to speak. Yes, yes. Do me a favor and just sit back. I'll get to whoever you are after I deal with my dear old comrade, Konan. He turned his attention back to the origami lady before him, opening his arms wide. It's been so long. Come down here and give me a hug, dear. Konan visibly sneered from atop her mount, refusing to acknowledge anything he was saying otherwise. On the ground, Orochimaru let out a soft chuckle. This was more along the speed of amusement that he had been looking for. It was always fun to belittle and squash those self-important S-rank criminals in Akatsuki. He noticed Karen slowly moving away from him and turned to see that she wasn't acting fearful of Konan, despite being clearly outclassed by the more powerful Kunoichi. Her red eyes were glued firmly to the form of the man Konan was with. I wasn't talking about her, Orochimaru-sama, Karen whispered fearfully, it's him. He's the one. He's the one I sensed before. That man with the orange hair and the piercings was the powerhouse that brought Karen to him in concern. It took a moment before Orochimaru truly understood what she was telling him. Once he got a look at the odd eyes inside of the man's head, it clicked. He then began to cackle aloud, "Ku, this is just wonderful. I'm being graced by the presence of Akatsuki's leader himself. The illustrious Pain. How interesting. I'm hurt, Orochimaru. Don't you remember me? Nagato said, his voice showing that he most certainly was not hurt. Well, seeing as how none of us ever saw you in person, Orochimaru said, still grinning as he stepped forward to face his would-be opponent, but now that you mention it, your voice does sound very familiar. Yes. I can definitely place it now, O great leader. As he prepared to wage battle with a worthy foe, Gurren stepped in front of him, ready to fight to the death for her master. Let us protect you, Orochimaru-sama, she said, glaring heatedly at anyone fool enough to go against Orochimaru's will. The loyalty was what he wanted instilled in all of his ninja, but it had no purpose here. He would tear right through you. You would buy me, what, 5 minutes at the most, Orochimaru said, calmly reaching forward and grabbing Gurren by the arm. Besides, who's to say I need or even want protection in the first place? Gurren's eyes went wide as she felt Orochimaru's grasp. He was actually touching her. Elation turned to concern when she felt it grow painfully tight. What are you saying? She wondered aloud. Orochimaru didn't answer her directly. Instead, he threw her behind him, as though she were an obstacle standing between him and something he wanted. There was an excited gleam in his eyes as he looked toward the sky. You can't stop him. You can't stop either of them. Continue with the operation. Listen to Karen's warnings. You can handle it alone. I want to see something for myself. Gurren stood up, hiding the pain from the minor injuries she'd received. You heard Orochimaru-sama. She said, regaining her composure, get moving. Retreat. Move the specimens. Konan eyed all of them like a hawk as they scattered and fled. She was ready to go after them when Nagato stopped her with a shake of the head. No. They're not worth anything. Once Orochimaru is dead, that will be the end of Otogakure. Keep your distance. Make sure I finish the job. Nagato. You know how he is. If he escaped Itachi, there's no telling how he'll make his getaway after I overwhelm him. I need you to ensure that doesn't happen. Then let me fight. I'm afraid you may not be able to defeat him. I want to be thorough about this. With that, Nagato dropped from the back of Konan's paper bird, landing on the ground in a crash of dust before standing up straight, continuing to stare the enemy of his organization down. Orochimaru simply smirked and crossed his arms as the wind blew over the cliffside plain. You've become sloppy, Nagato told him. After hiding from us for almost 10 years, it was almost child's play to track you down here in the open. I think I wanted to be found, believe it or not, Orochimaru said. You see, I have to admit, I've been rather bored lately. Every time you or anyone else has tried to oppose any of my plans, they all fail. I wonder, will you be like the rest? The arrogance, Nagato spat. You believe that because your body is no longer decrepit you have no equal. Well, you're not entirely wrong. We're not equals, he declared. No matter what you do to yourself, you're still just a man standing in front of God. Orochimaru snickered evilly in response, not intimidated by the Akatsuki members' attempts to intimidate him. And what is a god to a non-believer, Nagato? Nothing at all. Nagato slammed his hand on the ground, causing a massive plume of smoke that engulfed the area. Then I will have to make you believe. By the end of this, you will kneel and face your judgment. A massive crustacean's pincer flew out of the smoke, intent on snatching Orochimaru up and snapping him in half, but it was far too slow to make good on the attempt. A snake emerged from Orochimaru's mouth that spat the sword of Kusanagi into his hand. Orochimaru gleefully severed the claw and jumped through the air at Nagato, stretching his neck in his direction to bite his throat out with a bitter hiss. Nagato leapt off of the giant crab and dispelled it, firing a long black stake from one of its arms. Orochimaru's head reeled in the rest of his body, bringing with it the sword that he used to seamlessly fend the projectile off with a resounding clang. That's interesting. No hand seals or blood to summon. I want to see what else the Rinnegan is capable of. Nagato summoned another creature, this time a gigantic, deformed chameleon with a snake for a tail. The snake tail lashed out at Orochimaru with a volley of lightning-quick bites, but its target stayed elusive. The Akatsuki powerhouse didn't remain idle during this time. using the opening provided to summon more creatures, a giant centipede and a mammoth rhinoceros. The centipede quickly skittered over to attack and pick up where the chameleon left off. Orochimaru retreated directly backwards, pulling up the sleeve of his arm and cutting his finger to drag a trail of blood down a summoning tattoo inked onto his skin, Kuchi Yase no Jutsu, summoning jutsu. Orochimaru retreated back through the large puff of smoke as a massive snake came barreling out of it, opening its mouth and swallowing the charging centipede whole. The snake wound up trampled underneath the hooves of the rhino, leaving Orochimaru once again exposed as he too was stomped into the ground. Instead of blood and gore, mud splattered as a result of the summoned creature's rampage, the remnants of an earth clone. The real Orochimaru, safe and sound, rushed past the rhino and tapped it on its hind legs, saying "Goshu, coral palm." Large formations of coral grew inside of the joints of the rhino and began protruding from its skin, effectively immobilizing it in an exceptionally cruel manner. Orochimaru grinned evilly at the pained, low-pitched bellows. But now there was a problem. Nagato was nowhere in sight. He had disappeared into thin air. There was no sign of him anywhere, nor was there a sound to be heard, other than the injured rhino and the ever-intensifying wind. "Nagato! I know you can hear me," Orochimaru called out, keeping his guard up for anything that would expose Nagato's position. "Thank you for the warm-up." No response. Not that he expected one. Why would Nagato relinquish such an advantage for nothing more than idle banter? Even so, Orochimaru continued to speak. He had no such reason to remain quiet, which meant he would do the opposite. "Do you know what I hate most about you?" he asked, getting no reply again. "I'm a scientist. I believe in the potential of humankind to reach perfection. And one day, in my pursuit of it, I may very well run into someone farther along on that front than I am. But you, in all your hubris to call yourself God, are not perfection, in any way, shape, or form." A man could indeed make himself a god in Orochimaru's opinion. But it took more than power and force of will. Yes, those things indeed very important, but there was more to it than that. And Nagato lacked that something more. "If I am to be destroyed before I myself can achieve my destiny of becoming the ultimate being, well, if such a thing does come to pass, it won't be by your hands," Orochimaru said, intensity blazing in his snake-like eyes. "Anyone but you, Nagato. Anyone but you." At this point, it was a waiting game between two experienced shinobi with patience to spare between them. It was all quiet on the battlefront, but that would only last until one broke the very flimsy stalemate. There was a storm coming to the battlefield, in more ways than one. Konohagaku no Sato, Ichiraku Ramen. As the evening came, Naruto and Ino found each other and decided to head out for dinner, with Ino not wanting to go back to her family's home that night and neither one particularly in the mood to cook. Ino sat, waiting on her order and looked around at her modest surroundings. She never thought she would particularly enjoy going to places like this, as she was more of a restaurant with reservations kind of girl. But in order to date Naruto, the reliable old ramen bar came part and parcel. They'd been there enough by now that the owner and his daughter knew her name, and as much grief as she and many others gave Naruto for his ramen-heavy diet, the place had good food and a comfortable atmosphere. Naruto had been grinning up a storm ever since Ino had seen him again, and with good reason after he told her that he was in the running for a promotion. Ino couldn't help but smile along with him. It was easy to be excited about it when it was something that she knew was important to him. "Too bad you have to be cleared before you can take your Jonin exam," Ino said, unknowingly deflating her boyfriend. "Oh well. I guess that gives you time to prepare." Naruto dropped his head onto the counter with an annoyed groan and turned his face toward Ino. "Seriously, how many evaluations do I need before I can go back into the field?" he complained. "Isn't your whole watching me thing supposed to have been one big evaluation?" Ino smiled and patted the side of his head. "I wasn't evaluating you. I was just making sure there was nothing obviously wrong with you that slipped through the cracks in the meantime. Because I'm so dangerous. There are still people who think that about you. You think I'm dangerous?" Ino rolled her eyes. "Of course. You're a goddamn trained ninja. We're all dangerous." She reached over and picked Naruto's head up to give him a peck on the lips before he could start pouting. "You're not dangerous to me, Goldie." Naruto smiled at her in return and stirred a straw around in his drink restlessly. I just really want to get back into the game. Why are you in such a rush to get back to doing missions, Naruto? Ino asked him, resting her elbow on the counter, cheek pressed into her hand. You know you don't have anything to prove, right? Sometimes a shinobi gets captured. You aren't the first, you won't be the last. This isn't about that. You're lying. I don't need to read your mind to tell. You're just that bad at it. Ino nudged him with her foot to prompt him to tell her more. He hadn't clammed up and kept things that bothered him from her in some time. Come on. What do you have to prove? Naruto paused for a long time, just looking down at his folded hands set on the counter. Ino just sat at his side and waited patiently. From his body language, it was clear he was going to tell her. After years around him, she could tell the difference between Naruto clamming up altogether and him trying to prepare what he wanted to say. Because he wasn't much of a linguist, sometimes it took a while for him to get his thoughts together. The couple remained silent until their food was set before them, thanking Teiuchi. By then, Naruto had seemingly gathered himself enough to broach the topic. Do you ever wonder how good you are? Ino had broken her chopsticks apart and started into her meal by the time the question came to her, giving her time to think as she savored her first bites. Sometimes, she replied, I train most days. If you're not improving, you're regressing. But most of the time, I don't worry too much about it. Just so long as I'm good enough to protect my team and the people I care about. That's what's important, right? Naruto smiled at her, but there wasn't a whole lot of meaning behind it. That should be enough, shouldn't it? He said, but I want to be Hokage. I want to protect all of this. How can I do that, if I can't even protect myself? So it was about his most recent outing. He hadn't talked about it, but it had been obvious that he'd been holding on to something about the last mission that had ended badly. Ino loved Naruto's drive, but she felt that there were moments when he expected more from himself than anyone had any kind of logical reason to ask. You were fighting an army. Most Kage have their own forces to help them do something like that. Now things would have been worse if the Chuchikage had made it to the field, but dash. She noticed Naruto flinch as silently tucked into his meal. You have to be kidding me. I'm not, Naruto said through a mouthful of ramen, not stopping his attempts to eat for the sake of conversation. Baby, that's a Kage, Ino reasoned gently, you're not supposed to be able to fight them. No one is. That's why there are only 5 of them at any given time. If you want to be one, you've got to be able to beat one, right? Not really sure that's how that works. But that's how good I've gotta be, Naruto said, staring out blankly at nothing in particular in front of him. After Suna pulled their crap at Soraku, the only allies we have are Taki and Kiri, and the setup with Kiri is probably because we're too far away from each other to get into each other's business all the time. This wasn't some sort of personal fixation, Ino realized. It wasn't some milestone he felt like he needed to achieve in order to get to where he wanted to go career-wise. He was looking at the grand scheme of the elemental nation's current makeup, and when she herself stopped to think about it, things were just as unstable as they had ever been. They were well and due for another war if one were to look at history. One between Konoha and Kumo had been narrowly averted, for now, thanks to the safe retrieval Niujito. There was another potentially on the horizon between Konoha and Suna, and yet a third percolating between Konoha and Iwa after those 2 villages' attempts to exploit Konoha as they tried to deal with Akatsuki. The blonde telepath let out a hum and took a sip of her drink. I didn't know you knew or cared about politics, she admitted. Naruto shrugged, well, I was involved in most of this shit. My boyfriend, at the center of all the hot international incidents. Someone has to be, I guess. I just don't want you to get hurt dealing with all of this stuff I'm into. Ino was very unimpressed by the idea of letting Naruto go off and do Naruto things, i.e. fight battles of a titanic nature, without support. Yeah, let's be realistic. That's never going to happen, she said, gesturing in the air with her chopsticks. Any of us being safe went out the window the moment we got those neat little vests after the Chunin exams. That you never wore, Naruto chimmered cheekily, guess it wasn't fashionable enough for you. Making a point here, Goldie, Ino said sternly, despite the smile peeking through on her lips, even if you were strong enough to march out into the nearest field and challenge all of your scary S-rank enemies to a gigantic, epic cage-level battle that people tell stories about for decades on end, and win, I'd still try to be there with you. Even if it got me vaporized. A swell of familiar anger filled Naruto's chest for a moment until he was able to reach out and grab Ino's hand. If someone vaporized you, I don't know what I'd do. Hopefully, you'll never have to find out, Ino said, lightly rubbing the back of his hand with her thumb. Just don't go MIA again, please. You made me worry so much. I'll make you pay for every stress gray I find. Naruto laughed. He was certain that she was serious, even if she said it trying to be funny. Oh, I think I see one. Don't even joke about that. Tetsu no Kuni. Suten, Deikai Suiden, water release, great water mass bullet. A pair of massive water balls blew apart the head of a gigantic panda summon and ripped the right half of its body off. The creature stumbled in place for several moments before collapsing to the ground, dead. Orochimaru watched the panda die with a growing sense of agitation. Ever since Nagato vanished in thin air, his summoned creatures kept coming, even duplicates ones that had been killed. The bodies of several massive, odd monster animals littered the battlefield, some dead and in one piece, others with body parts scattered via Orochimaru's brutal methods of disposing of them. Was he trying to wear him down? The days when that was a viable strategy to use against him were over. I thought you wanted to fight me, Nagato, Orochimaru called out to his opponent. It's hard to believe you came all this way just to send your deformed pets after me. That's disappointing. He honestly hadn't expected Nagato to show himself after the amount of time he had spent hiding, but to his surprise, the man shimmered into existence, standing inside of the mouth of his summoned chameleon. His calm demeanor hadn't wavered in the slightest, even though he'd stood back and watched Orochimaru butcher his called-upon creatures. Orochimaru couldn't help but stare at Nagato's eyes. The Rinnegan. The Rinnegan. All this time, Nagato had the Rinnegan. It had been so long ago that Jiraiya had stayed behind in Ame to train those three kids. Konan, Nagato, and the third one. Orochimaru hadn't taken the time to even remember what they had looked like back then, only remembering them from back then because they remembered him when they came recruiting for Akatsuki. When thinking of Jiraiya's track record as a teacher, it made him laugh. His old friend apparently had a knack for finding the diamonds in the rough of the shinobi world and making them absolutely lethal. It would have been foolish to fight you now after what you've done to yourself without first taking the time to observe, Nagato said, stepping away from his chameleon and dispelling it back to whence he had summoned it from. Fools rush in, Orochimaru, regardless of how powerful they are. This is clearly something you've forgotten. Allow me to re-educate you. Orochimaru rolled his eyes as Nagato slammed his hand onto the ground, his form concealed again in a puff of smoke. More summoning. A waste of his time. What would he fight this time? A monster rabbit? A mutant squirrel? His skepticism faded when the smoke cleared and he saw 5 figures crouched around the original who had summoned them, all garbed in Akatsuki cloaks, all with distinct orange hair. All with the Rinnegan. Now then, Orochimaru, one of the men said, followed by another picking up where the first left off, I'll be gracious and let you select which path you take to learn your lesson. So choose. Now this is incredibly interesting, Orochimaru whispered, his heart beating faster in anticipation, in excitement. All of the cloaked men stood and spoke as one, choose from my 6 paths of pain. Omake, till death do us what? Aftermath. With all of the craziness that had been happening around him lately, Naruto decided that it was as good a time as ever to visit his mother's grave and catch her up on everything. There had been quite a few doozies, some of which he was certain she wouldn't have approved of if she were alive, given his idea of what mothers were supposed to think about things in regards to their kids. Still, it was nice to think that she could hear him and appreciated being kept up to date. He did the same thing with the Yondaime Hokage's head at the Hokage monument, only not as often. It was still a little weird, considering that Namikaze Minato was his hero before he found out he was the man's spawn. I wonder how many other women you had to scare away from Dad back when he started being a big deal, Naruto said to the picture frame he'd set at Kushina's grave marker. He'd cleaned the gravestone, replaced flowers, and lit a few candles to burn for the duration of his time there. I guess it's a good thing he didn't have to deal with Ero Sensei's stupid pass-the-buck crap with those Nadeshiko village women, 'cause then it have involved you. Naruto had tried to go about things somewhat diplomatically, only because kicking Shizuka's butt wouldn't have done anything to help. Kushina likely would have gone the confrontational route, consequences be damned. It was enough to make him laugh at the thought of his mom going off on some girl trying to marry Minato while she was still with him. Ino got pissed enough. From what people tell me, I don't even want to know how much you'd have probably blown your top if it was you instead. A certain someone's ears must have been burning. Here you are. Naruto turned around at the sound of Ino's voice and saw her heading his way along the beaten path. I hope you've been saying good things about me, she teased. Mostly, Naruto said with a shrug from where he was sitting in front of Kushina's grave. I'm pretty clear with the fact that I'm crazy about you, and the fact that you drive me up the wall sometimes. Ino rolled her eyes and walked the rest of the way over to her boyfriend. I've been looking for you all morning, she told him before her smile turned a bit sad. Sorry. When I sensed that you were here, I didn't know if I was intruding or not. Naruto stood up and dusted off the back of his pants. No, he said, moving behind Ino and guiding her into place by her shoulders as though he were presenting her to the grave site. I meant to bring you here eventually, I just could never find a good time or a way to ask you without sounding creepy. Ino shut her eyes and rested her hands over his. It's not creepy, Goldie. It's your mom. She opened her eyes and looked over the portrait that Naruto had put out for her. Wow, I've never seen her before. She's beautiful. Thanks, Naruto said, placing a kiss on the top of Ino's golden crown. You know, when I first saw a picture of her, I wish I'd have gotten her hair instead of this mess up here, he said, running his hand through his own unkempt, spiky locks. Hey, nothing wrong with being blonde. It's an elite club filled with very sexy people, Ino quipped before returning her attention back to Kushina's grave, melting into a comfortable silence. I wish you could have met her. I wish I could have met her. Have her scare the crap out of me the way my dad wants to do to you. Naruto only focused in on the last part of Ino's previous comments. Wait. Your dad wants to scare the crap out of me? He asked in disbelief. He already did back when we were kids. He wants to do it again? I thought we were cool. Well, before was probably a warning to keep your grubby mitts off, Ino said, grinning playfully as she rocked side to side in his arms. Since that clearly didn't work, now he probably wants to warn you not to let those hands wander too far. I'm pretty sure he doesn't know we're having sex already. Naruto's normally well-colored complexion went ghostly pale at the thought of dealing with Ino's mind-bending dad armed with the knowledge that his little girl's chastity had been taken. Oh, God. Ino was not helpful in calming his fears. Just don't think about having sex with me when he gives you the talk to not have sex with me. You'll be fine. I could taste the sarcasm from that, Naruto muttered before giving Ino a certain kind of look. Hey, can we not talk about that in front of my mother's grave, please? Ino gasped in fake surprise. You mean you haven't told her yet? Are you ashamed of me? She weaseled her way out of Naruto's grasp and bowed to the gravestone, placing her hand over her heart. Hello, Uzumaki-san. My name is Ino, the girl currently underneath your son on a regular basis. She could hear Naruto choking on the words he wanted to try and say in the background. I'm pretty sure she knows that much already, even if you haven't told her about it on one of your little visits. The thought of his mother knowing what he was up to was normally a comforting thought for Naruto. Not so much when he thought about her being aware of some of the more illicit things he got up to every once in a while. Every now and then I'll come by and talk, like I'm telling her what I've been up to. If her sense of humor was anything like mine is, I really think she'd have gotten a good laugh out of this whole Nadeshiko village thing. Everyone else did. Everyone except the purple-clad Kunoichi whose life was almost affected by that episode, or she'd want to kick Jiraiya-sama and slash or Shikamaru's ass for making this a thing in the first place. I know I do, and if Kushina would have as well. Ino knew they might have gotten along swimmingly, so, I haven't heard anything since Lee swooped in and came to the rescue. He's surprisingly cool with it, seeing as how he doesn't actually have to go live there, Naruto told her. After everything that had happened, Shizuka and her village were willing to make concessions as long as Lee was willing to do his part, which would involve eventual baby making. Guy-sensei's cool with it too, which is good. I was expecting a beatdown from at least him after word got around that Shizuka's claiming Lee as undisputed husband-to-be now. Rock Lee was likely going to be the first of his set of friends to be married, even if it was in name only to a girl from another village that just wanted his children. If anyone had been taking bets on that when they were younger, all of them would have lost. No question about it. Just thinking about it gave the blonde pair a set of matching headaches to go with their shared hair color. Ino sighed and shook her head with a rueful laugh. I don't even think I learned anything from this, other than the fact that other girls might want your superpowered babies, and they would never, ever get them as long as she was with him. Over her dead dim body, this was all such a big mess. Naruto wrapped his arms around Ino's waist and let the girl lean back into him cozily. You know I can't do anything small. Ino turned her head as Naruto leaned over her shoulder, letting him give her a kiss. It sure makes everything a lot more interesting, doesn't it? Interesting. That was his word for it? An undignified snort passed from Ino as she settled into a comfortable silence. It was a good, warm feeling, especially in the brisk mornings that Hinokuni had before the sun was high in the sky and the temperature warmed up properly. It felt right. As time wound down and Naruto prepared to leave, he got down and prayed quietly in front of Kushina's grave. Ino smiled at him and got down to pay her own respects. I don't know anything about you, ma'am, but you brought Naruto into this world. That makes you more important to me than you'll ever know, she thought honestly. Thank you for giving him to me. Ino really did wonder if Naruto's parents would have cared for her, because she loved him. As they left the graveyard and returned to the Konoha streets proper, Ino bumped Naruto with her hip. All I know is that after all of this, whenever you propose to me, it had better be good, she said, beaming up at him, a mischievous gleam in her expectant eyes. Really good. Like, you'd better pull out all the stops. Naruto raised an eyebrow, smirking down at her in return. Why should I have to propose? If you haven't been paying attention, I'm pretty used to girls trying to put a ring on my finger. Ino swatted him on the arm and crossed her arms in a pout. Naruto got a laugh at her expense and shoved his hands in his pockets nonchalantly. For what it's worth, I think my parents would have liked you. Yeah. That's it for part 41. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.